Desh-Videsh Conversations, speaking across the divide, is a bi-monthly hybrid webinar series, usually held in the South Bay, but we are glad that we are having a second one in the East Bay, thanks to students of Berkeley School of Journalism. The intent of these conversations is to get people out of their comfort zones, even if just for an evening, in the same room as people who may hold very different views on the state of our democracies, about faith, various forms of hate and phobia, and about supremacist movements across the world. Our panelists in these conversations have included well-known activists, Supreme Court lawyers, authors, academics, journalists, Dalit rights groups, and so on from India, as well as from the diaspora. Our willingness to engage with opponents, of course, is two-edged. In late 2022, Modi supporters led a massive letter-writing campaign addressed to the board of the India Community Center in Bill Peters, demanding that they not allow HFHR to hold our meetings at their facilities. Thankfully, the ICC board stood its ground, and we formally launched the Desh-Videsh series in 2023. Since then, our meetings have often been trolled, sometimes disrupted, and in one case, our guest speaker was close to being physically assaulted. Through it all, we have stood our ground and have encouraged people with drastically different points of view to come, listen, and ask tough questions, as long as I follow the meeting code of conduct. Just yesterday, we learned that this meeting too, small though as it seems here, is getting wide attention among Modi supporters in India, including an op-ed apparently this morning. I should write to them and thank them for the publicity. This is the 9th Desh-Videsh conversation, with the earlier ones in 2023 focusing mainly on India-centric issues, such as India's Discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act, the CAA. We call it Manufacturing Statelessness, question mark. The Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the UAPA. We asked, is it for curbing terrorism or is it to stifle dissent? Caste reservations, which became very current and relevant here in California. We had one talking about caste reservations in India, and another one here talking about SB 403, which unfortunately, despite the Democratic victory in the houses, was vetoed by the governor in what I would call as a campaign funds or veto scheme. We also covered Kashmir, both from the perspective of pundits, as well as from the perspective of the majority community. And lastly, here on October 10th last year, we met with 3 veteran journalists from India to talk about a crisis of democracy, the dire state of Indian media, right in this hall. Now, looking back to that meeting, it was just 3 days after the brutal attack and kidnapping of Israeli civilians by Hamas. But no one could have imagined at the time the sheer scale and brutality of state terror that the Israeli government would unleash on the Palestinians with the blessing and arms aid from the Biden administration. Reports say that close to 29,000 Palestinians have died since Israel began its genocide. The number is so numbing that it's almost like regular news, like we count oats, without imagining the horror that people must be going through. Now, also, India's Hindutva government of Modi has been getting ever closer to Israel ever since Prime Minister Modi came to power, with unprecedented purchase of arms and close cooperation on technologies, the most damaging to Indian democracy being the acquisition of Pegasus spyware to monitor and intimidate Indian activists, many of whom are in jail on false accusations with no chance to prove their innocence. The recent news that India may now be supplying lethal drones to Israel and that it plans to send Indian workers to Israel to replace Palestinian guest workers, in my view, mark an ignominious U-turn of India's historical support for the Palestinian cause. It is in this context that tonight's topic, Zionism and Hindutva supremacy, partners against pluralism, is an extremely relevant topic for all of us who are calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and support a lasting and just peace between Israel and Palestinians. We have a stellar panel tonight. A few housekeeping items. Please hold your questions till all the panelists are done. And you can write down your question on the index cards provided, pass them on to me. And after the last speaker, I'll take the questions one at a time. But please be brief. Please address it to a specific panelist. And please don't be personal or attack any organizations. Thank you so much for that. With that, our first speaker, I'll go ahead and introduce all the speakers so I don't have to come back again here. So please bear with me. Our first speaker is Zayad Abbas, Executive Director of the Middle East Children's Alliance in Berkeley. He's a Palestinian refugee from the Dahisha refugee camp in the West Bank, where he co-founded the Ibda Cultural Center. I met him for the first time in 1998 in Dahisha, along with the indefatigable founder of Becca, Barbara Lubin, as we saw the youth performers of Ibda sing and dance their courageous yet poignant journey since the Nakba. Zayed, perhaps you can update us on the latest condition in Gaza, as well as its ripple effects in the West Bank. And what is it that we are not reading here in the mainstream media? If you can, please also tell us what Zionism as a concept has meant to you personally as a Palestinian, and how you view the massive U-turn by India, which the Palestinians always counted as a steady and strong friend ever since Indira Gandhi's days. I'll go and introduce the next speaker as well. It is Ellen Brodsky. Welcome. A long-time Jewish activist and volunteer with Jewish Voice for Peace, Bay Area, a chapter of the world's largest anti-Zionist Jewish organization in solidarity with Palestinian freedom. I dread to imagine what life in UC Berkeley campus might have been for a meeting like this prior to the advent of Jews who are speaking up like you. Thank you. HFHR has been working closely with JVP in New York and Washington in protests, petitions, and other civil disobedience actions calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. This is the first time HFHR and JVP are appearing together, and I hope we get to do more work together because the goal is far away, but the work is a lot right now. You can tell us a little bit about perhaps your own evolution of JVP, and your own reckoning with Zionism. What is it feeling like to be ostracized as Jews speaking out against Israeli policy? It's kind of a deja vu for many of us in HFHR, who are now these days called anti-India, anti-Modi, anti-everything. What has happened to JVP since October 7th? Has your membership gone up, which would be a good sign that more people are waking up? Our third speaker is Professor Thomas Hansen, Professor of Anthropology at Stanford. He founded and directed Stanford's Center for South Asia from 2010 to 2017. Much of his early field work was done during the tumultuous tense years in the beginning of the 1990s, when conflicts between Hindu militants and Muslims defined national agendas and produced frequent violence clashes in India on the streets. Out of this work came one of his two books, The Saffron Wave, Democracy and Hindu Nationalism in Modern India, which explores the larger phenomenon of Hindu nationalism in light of the dynamics of India's democratic experience. I think he must be thinking very seriously about a follow-up book on so much that has happened since that book was written. If you could, what's your take on the growing alignment among supremacist movements across the world? Because I haven't mentioned white nationalism, both are obviously that's the third leg of the stool that we're dealing with here. And your view on what's happened in terms of Zionism and Hindu supremacy. or Joe Biden's policy on Israel and India on a dangerous, irreversible course? That's a question that I constantly am thinking about. Before I introduce the final speaker, Professor Ramya Vijaya, I would like to give some time to Whale West. How are you? Well, I contacted him earlier, but he got back to me today, and I was interested in him sharing with us what is happening on the legal front with the Biden administration. He's one of the petitioners, and I really know nothing much about the lawsuit. Perhaps you can come up here and tell us a little bit about it. And at that point, finally, Ramya, thanks for your patience. Professor Ramya Vijay is a professor of economics and global studies at Stockton University in Philadelphia, and an active member of the HR community. Ramya, any thoughts on that you have on the interconnectivity between Zionism and Hindutva? Why has it become more important than ever for progressive Hindus who oppose Hindutva to form broader coalitions to fight back, which perhaps is the first steps towards that direction? And also, you participated in the launch event of the Pilgrimage of Peace, Pilgrimage for Peace, from Philadelphia to DC last week or earlier this week. Perhaps you can talk about it a little bit. Thanks to all the panelists, and thanks for being here, all of you, and on Zoom on a Friday evening. So I call on Ziad to come up.
Here. I can take your tea. No, okay. Can I go?
Just go over. You need to speak quite loud.
Wow, wow.
Yeah, or just get closer to the mic as much as you can. As close as you're comfortable with. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ziad Abbas, and thank you, Raju, so much for that. I love that all of us, mostly, we are people of action. This is the place where we can relax. We can talk, we are not worried about how we'll be judged by white people. I'm so sorry. Okay, anyway, thank you so much for inviting us, and I know this is a very difficult time for all of the people they care about justice and for all the social movement. And for me, actually, when I heard, when you called me and when you emailed, yeah, of course, we met 1998. It was a long time back home in Dehetia, but here I am in the United States. I'm not going to go that much deep, especially about the relationship between Israel and India, because I know there are other speakers, they will focus more. And I'll try to focus a little bit about the situation in Palestine, in Gaza, and I will see how it goes. 15 minutes, right? We have 15 minutes, just to be sure.
Yes.
Be careful, we break rules sometimes.
Then I'll set time.
Okay.
Allows 5 minutes to break.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, this is the genocide in Gaza. Yeah. In fact, it's a genocide, despite the fact that some countries in this world, they try to questioning this, if this is a genocide or not, or at least in the international court, the way how they are dealing with our case. But for us and for our community, this is another nectar for us. And it's right now, while we are talking, they are already bombing. And there are other massacres. Actually, before I came here, just I checked the news, like there is 2 massacres happened in Deir al-Balah today, 18 people killed. And this is not, it will not include the numbers we will show later about the situation. This is ongoing genocide, and this is impacting our daily life. But the issue is not about us, it's about the people that are living in the ground, the people that try to survive there. But I will go through my slideshow, and I will try to share some of my own personal experience too. And here for me, simply, I call it, for the people to understand what's going on in Palestine. It's just about Zionist settler colonialism. But we don't take colonialism as the main key to understand the situation. There will be misunderstanding or confusing. For us, it's not confused, it's simple. We are a people living under settler colonialism. And we Palestinians, we learned a lot from many other nations. They were under settler colonialism. We learned from Vietnam, we learned from Algeria, we learned from India, we learned from Latin America, and we learned from South Africa. And right now it's our turn as Palestinian where we learn from others and maybe we will contribute new lessons to the liberation and to the struggle against colonialism. This is the way how we see it. Sorry. This is when it comes for us to the way how we see it, this Zionist settler colonialism created by other colonial powers. It's the same way. The British and the French and United States, they are behind this colonial system. They are protecting this colonial system. And we can see today or 2 days ago when the third veto in the Security Council to have a ceasefire. So it's this colonial system connected and created and protected and funded by these colonial systems. Of course, we go like the Jewish immigrants, when they came to Palestine, they came to replace us, not to live with us. We need to remember that. They never addressed us or acknowledged us that we are the indigenous people living in this land. They came to replace us, like what happened to my village, my parents' village, when they were uprooted in 1948. At the same time, you know the famous myth, they call it land without people for people without land. This is the justifying. Of course, it's a promised land the same way. They used the manifest destiny in this country. And sometimes you feel God is like a real estate agent, sit down in front of the computer, try to distribute land to people and punish others. This is how colonial systems sometimes try to justify and using religion justify what they are doing. Now, this is Gaza, and for the people I know I am far from the slide a little bit, but simply Gaza is not that a huge area. Gaza simply is just 139 square miles. I know the whole world right now, in both ways, the solidarity movement or the other power try to shut down any solidarity with Gaza, try to control this part of the world, Gaza Strip. If you can see, there are the gates, actually 6 gates, the red one. Sometimes they call it's the biggest open prison on earth, Gaza Strip. 6 gates, 6 doors for this prison. 2.3 million people they are living in this part. 5 gates controlled by the Israelis and 1 gate controlled by the Egyptian, where we see some of the aid coming to Gaza. Later, maybe we'll explain more. And here you can see the majority of the people in Gaza Strip, they are children. And remember, Howard Zinn, I quote him right now, he said, every war is a war against children. And here it's a fact, actually. These kind of genocides and this kind of attack in Gaza is against children. And the number will show later. And of course, Gaza, this is what the people sometimes they forget, that Gaza were under siege. When they start October 7th, Gaza almost 16 years under siege. Right now we are the 17th years under the siege. There is a generation grew up inside Gaza under the siege. We call them sometimes the siege generation. And these are the generation they don't know anything. They know they were stuck in all their life in 139 square miles. And this is connected. When we call it's a Nakba, and what's happening in Gaza, it's a Nakba. This is what happened actually in 1948. And this is something connected with us. And it's ongoing Nakba for us. Sometimes we refer to it as Palestinian. We call it the slow genocide, like during the siege. And after October 7th, we call it the speed genocide, how they push the number of the people killed more and more. And comparing with the past, here I will go fast. You can see there Yassin in 1948, April 1948. This is Khan Yunis, 2 brothers. The first one shot, the other one went to help his brother. They shot him and killed him. This is 3 weeks ago. Others, the way how they treat Palestinians in 1948, how they were arrested And you can see here how they are treating them. By the way, the footages here you see, this is footages from Israeli army. They took these photos, they share it in the social media. And you can see other way, the way how they arrested people in 1948 and right now in Gaza Strip. Of course, how they put the people in camps in Gaza and in 1948. And here you see the transfer. This is the photo actually from Israeli archive. Israel opened the archive in 1998. It's celebrating 50 years of Israel state. They opened the archive. And you can see these two, they are not far from the Holocaust, by the way, guys. And sometimes we refer to that. This is when the victim become a victimizer. They know how to hurt. And this is not far from the genocide. And this bus, by the way, going to Gaza Strip. And here you can see the difference or the connection between both 1948 and right now in Gaza Strip. This is the way that, as a matter of fact, this is like this kind of photos still happening every day. There is no clear number how many Palestinian prisoners arrested from Gaza to inside, and they took them. And there are unknown prisons. It's not unknown. They don't publish anything. And there are many cases right now, United Nations questioning actually the issue of rape for Palestinian women and Palestinian men. The camps, this is my camp where my mom moved actually. And this is the camps right now in Rafah. And of course, as I said, I lost the sound. Can you hear me? I don't know for the. This is during the 2008-2009. The people, they were very upset in Gaza Strip and angry from the sea. They started the Great March of Return. They started the Great March of Return in 2008, and they tried to respond. And it was every Friday, actually, where they go to the borders and the protest, and everyone was sharing in that period. So the people, they were rejecting. But here, after October 7th, we can see where they start bombing. And the amount of the actually explosives they are using in Gaza Strip.
Do you mind, just for a second, I'll share this on the
Please.
Zoom.
People on Zoom are not able to see the slides, so.
That's nice.
The share screen, you have to approve me to do that. I can't share the screen right now because you're the host. So you have to give me.
I will tell you.
Mhm.
Yeah, please go ahead, we'll take care of this.
Okay. We'll go to the second one. This is the impact of the bombing in Gaza. And these are the numbers. Raju spoke a little bit about these numbers. And here, this is the part we hate. And personally, I hate. When you start speaking about people numbers, you speak about 29,500 people, they are killed. 13,000 children, they were killed. But these are, everyone has their own story connected to their families. And these numbers actually increasing day by day. And you have over 69,000 people, they are injured. And many of these people injured, they are facing death because, as a matter of fact, the hospitals, we have 35 hospitals in Gaza Strip, 31 hospitals already out of service. Only 4 hospitals, and what they can do, it's only the first aid. They don't have that much, they don't have power. And this is part how Israel and the ethnic cleansing and the catastrophe, it's happening by the Israelis. They plan this kind of things. Of course, over 70% of the housing in Gaza Strip destroyed. And we speak here about massive starvation in Gaza Strip. And we speak about the disease spread everywhere. You can see over 700,000 people already, they are suffering from different kinds of disease in Gaza. And even if we stop the genocide right now, we need long time to deal with this kind of impact in people. We are not speaking about the people, they are already affected mentally. We speak about the people, they are physically, they are right now, they are suffering. And of course, in north of Gaza, it's the huge. I'm speaking like I'm working in Mecca, Middle East Alliance. I have two of my colleagues here. And we have our staff team. They are already in the ground in Gaza. Right now, they are working there. We have 7 staff members. They are working in Gaza. And we have other 3 staff members in West Bank. But this is like something that all the time, part of our work, you are waiting for all the time to hear day by day they are safe. Of course, we are waiting to hear everyone in Gaza safe, but these are the people we are connected in our daily life, and we want to be sure that they are doing the work they are doing. And of course, we speak about the hunger, the massive hunger in Gaza. And this is planned by the Israelis. When we speak about the genocide, it's not the idea they are just bombing. They are bombing, they stop the power, they block the food, they block the water, and this is part of the genocide where there are like hundreds of thousands of people right now under a threat. They will die from hunger in Gaza. I will go faster. I'm losing control. Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. In West Bank, of course, while I'm talking with you, things is happening, but we have, very quick, I will go with that. Over 400 people, they are already killed in West Bank. 7,500 people, they are arrested in jails. I am coming, like my family in the Haitian refugee camp, just yesterday, they shot 2 people and they arrested other people, they invaded the camp. And this is part of our daily, like all the time we want to check. And they invaded the camps, the cities, the areas all the time. Don't forget the settlers where they are attacking everywhere in villages in West Bank, because most of the people they are focused in Gaza Strip. The West Bank is like ignored a little bit, but this is the fact actually how the Israelis, no matter in Gaza Strip or in West Bank or in Jerusalem or 1948, you become a target. And simply, we Palestinians, old, young, children, we are the target for the Zionist movement. We are the target for the Israeli army in every level coming to us. And here we speak just very quick about children. More than 11,000 people, they are already in a prison right now, including the 7,500 they are arrested since October 7th. Among them children, over 200 children. And here, as you see, 500 to 700 children, they are charged in military court every year. I am accurate here about this. This is the data, how, like for the international courts submitted about this kind, bringing children to a military court. Of course, Gaza actually exposed the world. That is, I mean, the political bodies, how exposed all this double standard in this world, the value of the human being. We see how United States, England, we see how France, Germany, including India, how they come and jump to support Israel. At the same time, this is something where we can say connected to the history, how colonial system. And to be more clear, when we speak about other countries, they experienced the colonial system in natural way, in ethical way. They understand what it means to be under colonial system. They should be an ally for the Palestinian. But in our case, actually, some of these countries, like India, experience the colonial system. They are going to the other side. And this is the connection between Zionism, or sometimes it's the fascism when they come together and they connect and they support each other. And of course, actually, my colleague, she chose this slide, sharing, look, the honeymoon, the beach of Tel Aviv. And of course, just to remind the people that the first prime minister visited Israel from India, it was 2017. This is ever. And for me as Palestinian, I was born and grew up in a refugee camp. All the time, India is an ally. And to be more clear, there were many Palestinian students, they used to get scholarship from India, late 70s and 80s to go to study in India. But right now it's shifting. The relationship become more strong, and I'm not going deep here, but this is how it was in Tel Aviv and the connection between both. And here we speak about the military collaboration. I assume you'll speak about it.
Little bit, not
Little bit, but here you can look how this kind of collaboration, $2 billion, and 40% of the Israeli military actually selling military equipments, whatever, arms go to India. And this is the connection sometimes, the relationship between Israel and India when it comes around Kashmir too, how they collaborate together and how we learn together. And here we are, I know we are focusing in India, but not just on only India. Wherever you have about torture in the world, check very well. You will see Israel is there, connected. If you go to Salvador or you go to Honduras, especially about, I can say, Salvador, Honduras, many other countries like you find Israel, they are contributing and the exchange. They have become the expert. And of course, they become the expert because they use the Palestinian people in the lab. We are the lab in this, where they do all these kind of inventing, these kind of torture equipments, whatever they are inventing, and they use it first, they experiment actually on Palestinian. And as I said, Israel exposed the world, but sorry, Gaza exposed the world. Gaza at the same time did the awareness for the world too about the solidarity movement. And we see how the world reacting to that in different level. And this is what's good about Gaza. Gaza, I know, the moment you watch the news, you see, feel very sad, devastated, all these kind of feelings, tears, etc. But at the same time, you look about Gaza, you feel very proud of Gaza. And we Palestinians, we are feeling very, very, very proud of the people in Gaza because they shake the world and they wake up the world. They wake up the solidarity movement. And this is, we can see here the impact of this solidarity movement in every level, in everywhere in the world, in every street, even in India. And here we can see how the workers, the trade unions coming and support. I'm not going to read all of this for you, but if you're interested later, we can do it. But this is how the workers and the trade unions, they are coming together to raise their voice and to reject, to deal with this, or to be part of this genocide, because the Indian government, they accepted that. This is some hopes where we count on it. Because the only people they can stop the genocide after 140 days. Imagine 140 days of ongoing genocide. Still, we are not able to do that. We, the people, we can do this, and we hopefully we will do this soon as possible. This is something about the workers in India and how they respond to that. You speak about 14,000 workers. These are the trade unions. They are taking a stand. And we hope this movement, it will expand more and more and connect it to the rest of the international solidarity movement. Honestly, we have hope as Palestinians because our hope, we build our hope on the people and on the solidarity movement everywhere. Yeah, I'm not going to market our organization, but Mecca, we are an organization working there on the ground. This is something we are working every day. We have our staff, they take the risk every day. Every step they take it outside, it's a big risk. Every time for us, like even when they are sleeping in their house, it's a risk to be in Gaza this time. But still, we give a credit in Mecca, our offices here in Berkeley, but the people in the ground, they are doing the work. They are the people taking the risk. And by the way, sometimes when I could speak with my friends, my colleagues there on the ground, and try to learn how they survive. And they survive in two main elements. First one, it depends on their luck, where they are standing, where they are sleeping, where they will be in the second. The second thing they are surviving is the collective spirit, how the people, they take care of each other, how the people, they support each other, how the people, they share everything with each other. I know it's massive hunger. It's not something easy. People start dying from this genocide, and the way how Israel planned to block all these kind of trucks. We, in our work, we try to support as much as we can, many other organizations, but last 10 days, only 9 trucks entered Gaza. Gaza needs minimum 500 trucks a day. This is before October 7th. Minimum 500 trucks of food and water, milk, medicine, anything. Right now, in the last 10 days, 12 days, it's only 9 trucks. This is how genocide is planned, actually. This is part of the genocide. And still, we are able to do this work. In 2021, they were attacked. We succeed to bring ICU to Gaza. Now it's used there. We have ICU units waiting in the borders over 2 months and a half. It's ready. They don't allow this ICU, the one, the yellow one or the orange, to allow. It's still in the borders in Gaza Strip. Anyway, What we are looking right now is we want the people to take an action and to do whatever they can to stop this genocide. And let us be very clear. I know some people, they try sometime questioning like, yeah, October 7th, it was the reason for the genocide or what's going on. Come on. I'm so sorry to use this kind of language, but this is bullshit. This is something like we will never, like this colonial system for 75 years, ongoing Nakba for us, the catastrophe. As I said before, slow genocide, speed genocide right now. And for us, yeah, we want the people, for everyone, all of us, we are responsible. We are the people responsible about this. If we continue keep silent, now it's happening to Gaza. It was happened before in many other countries. If it's happening in Gaza, if Gaza will not, the people take a real stand, it will impact other nations, other people in the future. So it's up to us. And just I want to remind the people, take an action, do whatever you can, because your action maybe will save life. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. For some reason, I often have to speak after Ziad, which is a very hard act to follow, but I will do my best. So I was asked to speak more about how JVP developed over time to become an anti-Zionist organization and how it is being an anti-Zionist organization in the larger Jewish community. When Raju talked about not allowing Hindus for human rights to use that facility, it rang a bell because actually JVP is excluded from using any Jewish community relations, Jewish community centers. That same red line is put in place for JVP. We can't use them because the funding for a lot of the Jewish institutions comes from the Jewish Federation, which has a very explicit policy that they're not allowed to do anything with JVP. I think many of you here are familiar with JVP as it is now, which is an anti-Zionist Jewish organization that is working right now as Jews to stop the genocide of Palestinians, is intent on breaking the moral cover that Israel and the US use to justify the genocide, to project a Jewish voice that says, no, you cannot do that in our name. But JVP was not always like that, actually. JVP was started right here in the Bay Area in 1996 by 3 UC Berkeley undergrads as an all-volunteer Jewish peace group. In 2002, members began to take steps to build a national grassroots organization whose goal was to one day change and really break the US-Israel alliance, change US policies. At the time, there were people who were both anti-Zionist and maybe non-Zionist or even liberal Zionists. And there was a recognition at the time that in order to be a credible Jewish voice against the occupation, because at that time, JVP just talked about the occupation, we needed to grow much bigger, way bigger than we were. And so a big tent strategy of being anti-occupation and open to both Zionists and anti-Zionists was adopted. It was a strategic choice made at that time, and JVP paid a lot of attention to language and messaging to avoid using triggering terminology for Jews. Because the reality is that JVP has to chip away and has to fight the strong emotional attachment that many Jews have to Israel. Zionism frames the existence of Israel as a Jewish state as necessary to keep Jews safe from anti-Semitism. Parents will say to their children that you will never get sent to a concentration camp because Israel exists. I recommend, if you haven't seen the movie Israelism, I highly recommend it because it's basically such a strong picture of how the indoctrination, how powerful the indoctrination to support Israel and Zionism is among Jewish communities in the United States. Starting with very young children, it's kind of shocking. I mean, even I, as a Jewish person, I didn't realize how strong it was. And I'm just gonna take a minute to talk about me, because I'm actually not your average Jew. I grew up in San Francisco in a secular Jewish family. My dad had been in the Communist Party, so he was an internationalist. He was not a Zionist. I did not grow up with Zionism, swimming in Zionism as a lot of Jews do today. But even for me, even for my dad, there was this kind of attachment to Israel as a Jewish homeland, okay? And actually, the Communist Party of the United States has a rather shameful history of supporting the colonization of Palestine. Someone in JVP wrote a history of that, actually. But so for me, it wasn't hard to leave Zionism in the sense that I hadn't grown up in it, but I didn't really understand it. And so when I would look at what was going on in Israel and see what was happening to Palestinians, I would like, why are these Jews acting so badly? You know, what is with these Jews? Because I hadn't, you know, those weren't my values. And I think a lot of young Jews feel that too, actually. So learning about Zionism, learning about its origins as a settler colonial movement, about its support by imperial powers, really helped move me from a place of guilt and shame about why are Jews doing this, to a place of action, to a place of taking action to support Palestinian liberation, and gave me a passion to help other Jews make that journey, which is why I'm working with JVP. I've been working with JVP since 2014. Even many Jews who may be critical of Israel's policies toward Palestinians still believe that it's possible to have a gentler, kinder version of Zionism, and that an ethno-nationalist Jewish state is necessary for Jewish safety, and they still worry about the demographic threat that Palestinians cause. And it's important to realize that Israel and its Zionist supporters in the United States work very hard to connect the Jewish community's trauma about the Holocaust and fears about anti-Semitism to the need for a Zionist state as the only way to be safe. And for example, you hear the Zionists talk a lot about October 7th was the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, okay? Which is comparing October 7th to the Holocaust, which was the murder of 6 million Jews. That's just playing on Jewish people's traumas. To borrow a term from Ziad, it's bullshit, okay? In other words, we had folks in JVP who had family members killed in the attack by Hamas. But at Jewish Voice for Peace, we can both grieve for Israeli civilians and understand that what the root cause of the violence is, which is what Ziad was talking about, okay? We can hold both at Jewish Voice for Peace. So I'm just gonna briefly cover some of the factors that help to move JVP toward anti-Zionism. First and foremost was Palestinians, accountability to Palestinians. Palestinians were instrumental in helping the members of JVP understand that Zionism can't be fixed, that it was a settler colonial movement from the beginning that wanted the maximum amount of land with the minimum number of Palestinians. And at JVP, we consider accountability to Palestinians as essential to our continued growth It's an ongoing process of deep listening, continual relationship building, and genuine reassessment, okay? We learn from Palestinians who are leading the movement for their freedom. Also, the facts on the ground in Palestine over the years, I mean, what is the logical result of Zionism? Genocide. It's genocide. It's what we're seeing in Gaza right now. And so this, over the years, more and more Jews are coming to recognize that, oh, this is not just an aberration of Israeli policy. This is Israeli policy. Genocide is Israeli policy. Also, younger Jews are very different from the older generation of Jews. They're further removed from the Holocaust, and they've had less direct experience with some of the institutional anti-Semitism that the older generation faced. For instance, my dad, when he graduated from law school, he could never go to work for a lot of law firms. The only avenue that was open to him as a Jew was either a Jewish law firm or maybe labor law firms, right? Also, young Jews are on colleges with everybody else. They're learning about settler colonialism in the United States and in Israel, and also they're taking part in great numbers in the struggles for racial justice. And so when they go to Israel, the progressive values they hold from being here in the United States come up against the stark reality of the oppression of Palestinians they see and the racism of Israelis toward Palestinians. So all of this is helping move younger Jews toward anti-Zionism. And another big factor is the campaign by Israel and its Zionist supporters to replace the long accepted definition of anti-Semitism, which has always been discrimination against, violence towards, or stereotypes of Jews for being Jewish, with a definition which defines anti-Semitism as criticism of Israel and Zionism. So what does this do? Zionists use this false definition to imply that Palestinians are inherently anti-Semitic when they speak about their experiences with Zionism. They use this definition to attack anyone who supports Palestinian freedom or human rights. And they use it against Palestinians first and foremost, but also against Black people and other people of color who stand in solidarity with anybody who stands in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And they also use it against Jews like those of us in JVP. And one big development was that in 2023, the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, people are familiar with the ADL, they attacked JVP and the Council on Islamic and American Relations and Students for Justice in Palestine. And they said that anti-Zionism of these groups equals anti-Semitism and compared all of us to white nationalists. And that was so outrageous that even some liberal Zionists came to our defense. Actually, it was a kind of a turning point, because there are liberal Zionist organizations who disagree with defining anti-Semitism as criticism of Israel or Zionism. So I just briefly want to talk about the steps that JVP went through to move the whole organization toward an anti-Zionist organization. We educated people about the Nakba. We had developed a curriculum and a study about the Nakba so that folks could understand that the oppression and displacement of Palestinians didn't start in 1967 with the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, but with the founding of Israel as a Zionist settler colonial state. And in 2014, and the other big step forward that JVP took was in 2014, in 2015, we adopted and supported the call for BDS. Before that, JVP had only supported boycotting settlements products from the settlements, but we adopted the full support of the boycott, divestment, and sanction movements. And then in 2014, it became clear that we needed to clarify our position in order to basically build solidarity with Palestinians. And so over the next few years, which included education about Zionism, discussions with members, consultations with Palestinians, rabbis, all of our constituencies. And in 2018, the board adopted a new anti-Zionist statement. And I think, again, because JVP chooses to work in the Jewish community, that's who we see, bringing our people along with us, breaking the cultural ties to Zionism in the United States. Even in our statement on Zionism, we took care to address the specific concerns and fears of the Jewish community. So, for example, we opened the statement by saying, we know that opposing Zionism or even discussing it can be painful, can strike at the deepest trauma and greatest fears of many of us. And then we went on to explain how Zionism was settler colonialism. But in order for us to be effective, we have to address that trauma in the Jewish community. And it can be kind of frustrating sometimes because there's a lot of white privilege in the Jewish community. There's a lot, Zionists push exceptionalism of anti-Semitism, right? They continually push. And by Zionists, I'm talking about right here in the Bay Area, the Jewish Community Relations Council, the Anti-Defamation League, many synagogues. You see it. I just heard today that Zionists are going to be organizing a march on March 3rd in San Francisco, you know. So the last thing I want to talk about is what's happened to JVP since October 7th. Basically, in one word, tremendous growth. In the Bay Area alone, over 19 people have signed up to join us, and our chapter is working really hard to grow our structure to provide ways for them to get involved now, because we realize if we don't keep these people, if we don't bring them into JVP now, when things change, when the situation on the ground changes, and it will, because the people are going to win, then they'll just fade away. So it's really important to us to have this moment be one where we bring people in, even if they're not fully anti-Zionist, even if they don't understand Zionism, and help them get there. And just one thing I want to say that's pretty painful about working in Jewish Voice for Peace is that there's always an upsurge in our membership when the worst violence and genocide and oppression is being visited upon Palestinians. I just want to acknowledge this because it's very painful as a Jewish activist to see this, but at the same time, we're working really hard to bring those people with us, to help them move and understand the reality. And the other thing I want to say is that JVP, we both move Jews in solidarity with Palestinians, but we also work to move Judaism to build a vibrant Jewish community without Zionism, okay? Because the reality is that Jewish institutions provide a community for a lot of Jews, and unless we build an alternative community for those Jews, they're never going to leave Zionism, okay? Because they are ostracized by their families. They are ostracized by their friends, you know? And so we need to build a rich Jewish community without Zionism that builds on the best of Judaism, both secular and religious Judaism, that honors our anti-Zionist ancestors, that lifts up Yiddish and the culture of Eastern European Jews, the Bund, the Jews who fought in the Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, against Nazis, against the Tsar, because we realize that we commit to dismantling anti-Semitism in the most effective way possible as part of our struggle against all forms of oppression and bigotry. And we understand that our struggles must be united to succeed, and we intend on succeeding. So our commitment to Palestinian liberation is fundamentally a commitment to fight against racism and for a world where everyone lives with dignity, power, love, community, and justice. So just one last thing, JVP, since October 7th nationally, has grown to almost 800,000 members and supporters, to 83 local organizing groups, and has 2.13 million social media followers. Okay, because basically genocide in Gaza has torn the mask off of Zionism, not just for Jews, but for everybody in the United States. And because we've been there, because we've provided a home for Jews critical of Israel's oppression, people can come to us now. They have a place to go to. Newly horrified Jews, Jews who are waking up to the reality of Zionism, and they're turning to us to take action in support of a ceasefire. And so we're welcoming them, even if they're not anti-Zionist. We're saying ceasefire now, let Gaza live, end US funding to Israel, never again means never again for anyone, means never again for Palestinians. I think people may have seen the big mass civil disobedience actions we put on at the Capitol, at Grand Central Station, here in Oakland at the federal building, because what we want to do in this period where the US is supporting Israeli genocide, we're determined to break the political conflation of Judaism with Zionism, which turns Jewishness into a moral cover for US support of Israel and Zionism. And I just want to end with something that was said on our JVP national membership meeting the other night, 1,500 people from around the country and the world. Stephanie Fox, our executive director, said, "The only thing worse than denying the Holocaust is to use it to justify genocide on the Palestinian people." And to me, that was a very powerful statement, something that Jews need to take to heart. And that's why we're working under the leadership of Palestinians who are leading the movement to put an end to the genocide in Palestine and to put an end to the US-Israel alliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Raju. Thank you for all the organizers in Hindus for Human Rights. I really appreciate this initiative. I think this is an exciting and timely new development also in the kind of activism that you have been doing for a long time. So thank you for that. I want to shift gear a little bit to and do my part as a kind of slightly perhaps more academic voice. Now we have heard some really great presentations on what's happening now and some of the activism. So I want to give you a little bit of background and do a little dive into some of the historical background for the connections between Hindutva and Zionism. So, and I want to say before I start that, I don't know if we can get a picture of this, but if you are interested in more details about the relationship between India and Israel, there's a great book written by a South African journalist called Asad Essa. It's called Hostile Homelands. It came out last year. It didn't get a whole lot of press. It was kind of ignored. Surprise, surprise. It's a great book that has a great deal of detail that tells both the long story as well as the more recent story about the relationship between Israel and India and Israel and Zionism and Hindutva. But let me begin with what Sia was mentioning these stories the last few weeks about long queues of men in North India lining up to become laborers in Israel. Several of the men who were waiting to be recruited and tested expressed great confidence. They were assured by government agents that they would be, as one man said, protected by the government of India as well as the Israeli army against the terrorists. And there are in fact plans of as many as 100,000 people being recruited. This is what came up in Knesset recently. I'm not going to talk a great deal about the arms sales, the fact that 40% now, the latest count of Israel's arms sales go to India, the security forces advisors that are all over India's sensitive areas in the northeast and Kashmir, the deep collaborations with Indian police forces, security forces, and so on and so forth. Other people, there's a new book coming out from Stanford University Press later this year that actually details a lot of that. Well, I want to begin perhaps, or just begin with a slide, going back in time to 1990 when I was doing my early work on Hindu nationalism, which at that time was a well-established but still marginal but growing force in India. There I met a well-educated member of the Hindu nationalist movement. He had recently returned from what he called a study tour to Israel. And he told me the following. What impressed me the most, he said, was the devotion to Israel as an idea. Everyone serves in the army. Everyone knows how to defend themselves and their country. If we foster the same spirit among the Hindus, we will be an invincible power. And the root of many of these alignments that I'm going to talk about now, past and present, between Israel and sections, not all of Indian society, but sections of Indian society, in fact, lie in the early decades of the 20th century, where range of movements espousing a kind of conservative counter-nationalism emerged in response to the deepening crisis of European empires and the mounting strength of anti-colonial sentiments across the world. There are well-known examples such as the Afrikaner nationalism in South Africa that gave birth to apartheid, Salazar and Franco's national conservatism in Spain and Portugal and their celebration of their ailing empires, but also Hindu nationalism in India and indeed, as we will see, Zionism. So the meeting point is in fact in colonial forms of domination, the idea of colonization, the idea of a European domination of the world. This is how Zionism began among European Jews who saw that this was how to solve the crisis that they saw in Europe for the European Jewry. But I'll begin with India first, so you can see the connections. Let's see here. Yeah, I'll begin with the kind of ideological godfather of Hindu nationalism, V.D. Savarkar, who was a Brahmin, born a Brahmin, but saw himself as a modern man. He saw himself as a political Hindu. He coined the term Hindutva in 1923 in a book of that name, or that title. And he was uninterested and indeed rather contemptuous of Hindu ritual and what he saw as petty caste distinctions, which he saw as distractions that were weakening Hindus in their civilizational clash with Muslims, blocking the necessary efforts of shedding their own sense of inferiority and timidity. Many of them, this is his definition of what a Hindu is. It's a political definition. Those for whom the Holy Land and their fatherland coincide. This is very close to a kind of Zionist conception of the nation. And here's some wording from an RSS man who told me this is not really about Hinduism, it's actually about the nation. It's about creating a homeland for Hindus where everybody has to fall in line with Hindu culture. It's interesting that Savarkar, he was initially a radical opponent of empire, but he was put in prison by the Brits, and where he turned his attention to Muslims as what he thought was the true enemy. It's well known by many who studied Savarkar. He actually cut a deal with his British jailers and was allowed to convert his jail time to a rather gentle house arrest regime in his hometown on the western east coast of India. And there he helped inspire a movement that became the big movement, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, I lost connection, I think. Yeah. There was a movement that was formed in 1920s. It took direct inspiration from fascist movements in Europe. The leaders expressed admiration for both Mussolini and Hitler's, admiration for the race purity of the Germans. They also took their initial uniform from, in fact, the British colonial police. Many of the Hindu early leaders of the RSS saw their job as to create a small core of disciplined men who could run the country, and they looked at the Brits and they saw a small number of disciplined white men who were able to run and dominate society, and that's what they wanted to emulate. Hence, their fascination with this kind of uniform, with physical strength, and so on and so forth. This movement also, which is where Modi spent his entire grown-up life, never really participated in the anti-national, anti-colonial struggle, although they would claim that they did, but they did not. Instead, what they were interested in was the idea of strength, the idea of building out Hindu culture. And here's some quotes from M.S. Golbakar, the Supremo for many, many years of this organization, who basically argued that those who were born in India would always be a son of the soil, and but if he begins to change his religion, then that the whole thing changes, and India cannot be a son of the soil for those who are intolerant of other faiths. So it's a kind of turning that into the test. And also this worship of strength, physical strength, and so on. So that's kind of some of the well-known stuff many of you will know. Let me turn to Herzl, who actually is a figure who is in some ways curiously close to Savarkar in his own background. He's a man who came from an assimilated Jew. He's the sort of the father, ideological father of Zionism. He was not interested in Judaism. He saw himself as a political Jew, and he argued that the only way to solve the problem of anti-Semitism was to turn Jews away from being what he called an anomaly in Europe, right, and minority everywhere, into a majority somewhere, right, and which this minority status had locked Jews in a sort of in these state of underdevelopment, state of lack of modernity, lack of progress, and instead he wanted to emulate, as it were, imperial progress and what he saw as imperial domination. And he proposed in a book called The Jewish State, which is kind of his big book about this, a model that was like the colonial model of creating a company that would get funding from major European powers to colonize a land. And he wanted to call it the Jewish Chartered Company, that would be set up as a joint stock company on the lines of how European colonization of most of the world had proceeded. He wrote a fawning letter to Cecil Rhodes, the arch-imperialist, the British arch-imperialist, to get his stamp of approval for this plan. And he also said in a very interesting statement that if we do this, in fact, we will, all the anti-Semites will become our most dependable friends. The anti-Semitic countries will become our allies. Interesting to think about at this time. Here is what he wrote to Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes is the man who dreamt of colonizing Africa from Cape Town to Egypt to Cape Town for the British. He wanted his stamp of approval. He was campaigning him, and so on and so forth. And he, like other people in the movement, but him more than anyone else, was actively engaged in this idea of Israel as a buffer zone, as a kind of civilizational outpost of the Western world of Europe, that would take over this land between the East and the West, create a bulwark against the more hostile East, and then in time would become a miniature England, right? Would become this sort of, as you can see here in the quote, that Israel could begin its own colonization scheme in Africa and elsewhere, and so on and so forth. This found a great deal of favor in the British government, and here's one senior British military expert who, in the Guardian in 1918, wrote with great approval that this would be a really fine idea to build this kind of foothold in the Eastern Mediterranean as a kind of subcontracting of the British Empire to the Jewish state. They could, as he says, work as well there in southern Syria as it did in India. So this is where it comes from. Of course, there's a lot more to say about what Zionism became, and there was labor Zionism or progressive Zionism, religious Zionism, and there are many kinds of Zionism, but this is how it begins. This is how the political project begins. I say this because the echoes of this kind of colonial nostalgia, if you like, is also at the heart to address what Raju said of much of the sort of white nationalism, Christian nationalism you see across the world, right? If you think of what drove the forces of Brexit in Britain, it was clearly a colonial nostalgia. What drives a lot of the white nationalism across Europe is a nostalgia for a time where everybody where people knew their place in the global pecking order. Christian nationalism in the US is all about the same thing. So the colonial, the fantasy, the early 20th century as a kind of high point of white domination of the world is a reference point. Curiously, that's also a reference point for the Hindu nationalists. But before I get to that, let me just quote you a little quote from Lev Jabotinsky, who is a man who wrote a famous book in the same year as Savarkar called The Iron Wall, where he argued for the necessity of walling in Israel and was sort of gave up on any kind of idea of creating some kind of compromise with the neighboring Arabs and wanted to get rid of everybody and create this kind of enclave of military might. You may or may not know that Netanyahu's father was a historian who was a great fan of Jabotinsky and saw himself as a kind of disciple of him. So what we see today, the wall and all of that stuff was already conceptualized at this point. I want to wrap up, go back to another kind of nostalgia for the colonial, which is the notion of undivided India or Akhanda Bharat. You can find this map anywhere in India. You can go to any railway station, there will be books, there will be posters, you can find it everywhere. It's a map of pre-1947 British India, right? Burma, even Afghanistan that was never really colonized. But this is the history of when India was divided. This is the fantasy that has been going on for a long time. Now it has a lot more purchased political support. And it wasn't just the Hindu nationalists who supported this. Here's what I found. Here is a quote from the Greater India Society, which is a kind of advocacy for Greater India, sort of recognition of India as a civilizational power in the East, headed by a man called Kalidas Nag. It was a society that also had very famous Bengali intellectuals as members in the 1930s. They wanted to advocate the idea that, you know, India should assume a role as a kind of soft colonizing power in Southeast Asia and reclaim its grandeur from its past and so on. And all that had been squandered or lost during the last centuries under Muslim domination in India, so the reasoning went. And this is not a dead thought. In fact, this map is just been installed last year in the new Parliament building in New Delhi. And for those of you who can read this, there are some interesting Sanskritized renaming of places in Pakistan over there, up in Nepal and so on. So it caused a minor diplomatic incident among some of these countries. But this is what they are dreaming of, and this is how the RSS Supremo, who is seen here in front of the map, also sees India as this kind of greater India that has to be retrieved and brought back to its, as it were, the colonial order, because this is not a historical India, this is a colonial India. So that's where the connection is. I think with other kinds of majoritarianisms and supremacists, it's still colonial nostalgia that drives it. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I learned a lot looking at these maps. I thought they were stories of the past. Not at all, not at all. I invite right now, Well, and I don't know how to pronounce your last name.
You pronounce it correctly.
Yeah. We spoke only today, so he's not on the program, but I thought following up on other discussions, especially by Vijaya, he's, as I understand, he's one of the petitioners of a lawsuit against the Joe Biden government on its Israeli policy. So since we are running late, kindly, if you can summarize what it is about, how we can participate and assist in this process, it'd be fantastic.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm told I have to do this really quickly. That's okay, no, everybody's fine. My name is Wael Bouhaisi. I am a Palestinian American. I am originally from the Gaza Strip. I do have extended family in the Gaza Strip. I was born and raised in Kuwait. Like majority of the Palestinians today, we are a diaspora people. I'll talk about the case a little bit and try to put it in context of everything else, not to change the topic very much. Like Ziad, I grew up in an era where we took India as a natural friend and ally. It's very disturbing to see the path the government currently is taking, so it's very important to have this discussion. I'm grateful that you created this space. Can you hear me? Okay. So it's important to also talk about what Israel is doing right now. We use the term ethnic cleansing. And what Israel does today, the genocide ethnic cleansing doesn't quite capture. Israel is conducting a campaign of truly uprooting the Palestinians and destroying their lives. Almost immediately after 1948, like literally the day after, Israel proceeded to destroy any remnants of the Palestinians that destroyed close to 530 villages, towns, uprooted hundreds of thousands of olive trees. So symbolically and materially, Israel proceeds to uproot Palestinians every time it can. And this is what's happening currently. Housing blocks are being destroyed, just to be destroyed. Even Israel controls completely these areas. There is no resistance. Dozens of graveyards are being bulldozed. Graveyards, imagine. There's about 6 to 8 hospitals who are partly functional still, out of 40 plus hospitals. So the healthcare system is completely destroyed. Historic monuments, artifacts are being destroyed and stolen. The Omari Mosque that stood since the 7th century was flattened. Gaza's, the world's 3rd oldest church was destroyed. Almost every mosque, every university in Gaza was flattened. So there is a clear intention to not just ethnically cleanse Gaza, but to destroy the Palestinian life, memories, history, livelihoods. So I do have family in Gaza. I've lost many of them. A few of them were immediate cousins and nephews. One of my cousins, Samer's body is still under the rubble months later. This happened on October 12th. This is an experience shared by many people in Gaza. And we found a bunch of plaintiffs for this case because literally every Gazan family I know has lost people in Gaza. I was approached by CCR, Center for Constitutional Rights, a human rights legal organization, to be one of the plaintiffs for a case against specifically Joseph Biden, his Secretary of State Blinken and his Secretary of Defense, Austin. And, the basis for that case was basically to hold these individuals representing the White House and US governments as, according to the Geneva, Genocide Convention, 1948, as complicit and, as, individuals who failing to stop genocide. These are also criteria of accountability under the Geneva Convention for genocide, not just committing the genocide. So I'll brief you a little bit about the case and what happened. With myself, 6 other individual plaintiffs and 2 organizations, Al-Haq and Defense for Children International. The complaint was filed on November 13th. The government responded by asking to dismiss the case. They cited something I think it's called policy doctrine, meaning this is foreign policy and this is no place for the court to adjudicate it or hear the case. We challenged this and we submitted declarations and eventually the judge granted a hearing. The legal team requested, and they thought it was a long shot, right? Requested from the judge to allow us to give live testimony in the court. This is, by the way, a Oakland District Court Judge Jeffrey White, whom we thought was a little conservative. He was assigned by W. Bush. But to our surprise, I mean, the judges gave us a heads up. They said, well, you might testify, but we don't think the judge is going to allow it. We're pleasantly surprised to learn that the judge actually was going to allow us, all the plaintiffs, to testify. We thought this was a good sign. The hearing took place in Oakland on January 26th. There was a massive show of popular support. I don't know if any of you were there. It was really a sight to see. Thank you. And then we went in court and our legal team presented legal arguments. The government presented their counter argument, and they maintained basically that they did not argue the point of genocide whatsoever. The only argument was that this is a matter of foreign policy, and this was no place, that basically this wasn't something that the court should rule on. Our team was very well prepared. They presented brilliant arguments. The government team looked really underprepared and almost insultingly underprepared. I mean, the judge was visibly annoyed by them. The judge actually opened the proceedings with really an amazing kind of background where he explained what happened on October 7th, and he laid the ground that what Israel is doing is so and so and so and so, meaning violence, killing. This was surprising, pleasantly surprising. The judge gave us extra time to fulfill our testimonies. We testified for almost 2 hours. We presented powerful individual testimony. And it was quite amazing because for the first time probably in the history of this country that Palestinians were actually the accusing party in a federal court. We got to tell our story. We didn't just talk about our families that were martyred and destroyed, but we also got to recite the history of Palestine, our original Nakba, our catastrophe. When we see our families basically being uprooted and our people, the scenes of people marching, very similar to what Ziad showed earlier. The first thing that came to our mind, to my mind personally, that it's my families in 1948. There were very similar images and kind of brought up feelings of intergenerational trauma that Palestinians feel. The proceedings ended. We felt excellent about it. There was a great show of support. There was a lot of media coverage. And the judge's tone was incredible in that he really made sure to give us the time and the space to present our case. We're not expecting to win outright because we understand what the court system is and what it's about. And that's something I want to quickly touch on. The judge, a few days later, only less than a week later, did dismiss the case, as we kind of expected, albeit disappointed. But the judge also had extremely powerful language. He did basically call out the government, and he did stop short of saying what's happening is genocide. He did say how disturbing it is, what's happening, and he did call out responsible people, stop what's happening. It was very powerful acknowledgement from a federal judge. And he said something very powerful. He said, it is rare that a desired outcome or a preferable outcome is not available to the court. And he said, well, but basically I have to dismiss this on the grounds that it is foreign policy. I don't believe this is correct because clearly the US is violating its own federal law by supporting genocide and being complicit in genocide. But this tells us where the courts are. I mean, the card is stacked against us. We're not gonna win this in courts or the UN. And that's what I think need to emphasize, as important as what happened. What makes this possible, what makes it showing like this possible is the grassroots organizing. It is by this massive movement that we're creating that continues to grow, that we are able to take that energy and power and knock on the doors that are not available to us yet. Hopefully, eventually create a crack. It is the massive movement and its size and its momentum that allows us to be heard in courts and ICJ. Incidentally, the same day the ICJ ruled, it's important, the ICJ and the Auckland court both basically literally say that what's happening in Gaza is plausibly genocide, right? But these rulings take time. We've appealed to the Ninth Circuit. This is a federal court, and we are filed a motion to expedite the hearing because it is genocide. So it remains to be seen. You can go to CCR websites. There is full kind of documentation of everything from the original complaint to the judgment to the actual video of the day of the testimonies. How can we support this? I think continuing to plug in the movement. I don't think we can do much to affect courts and what they do. I think continuing to plug in the movement, continuing to come out to rallies and demonstrations with your friends, continuing to talk about Palestine. You mentioned earlier that this is becoming normal news. We shall not allow this to be normal. This is not normal. We have to continue to raise our voices, continue to think of this as urgent and act as such. This is not just about Gaza, this is about our collective fate. We're making wins. We are being heard as city councils, passing resolutions, student councils. If you see Davis passed BDS resolution the other day, UCLA as well. Labor union from India to the Netherlands to millions of laborers in the United States are passing ceasefire resolutions. We are winning. So we have to continue to come out and we continue to support the movement and grow it. Thank you.
So much.
The last word tonight will be from Professor Ramya Vijaya, who is in Philadelphia. He is also an active member of the Hindus for Human Rights community. Ramya?
Thank you, Raju. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. And I thank all the other speakers for their powerful testimony. I'm going to talk more from a personal perspective. I'm going to talk about the links between these supremacist groups by recounting two events that I experienced. The first is the Palestinian Literary Festival that was held on the premises of the University of Pennsylvania in September 2023. Some of you might have heard about it, mostly in a negative light. Even before the event was held, the organizers, which included some from the Penn community, faculty and students, and a group of authors and literary scholars, faced a barrage of pushback from Zionist groups alleging anti-Semitism. But there was no specific information about who or what was anti-Semitic about a literary festival that was meant, like all academic and literary festivals, to celebrate the creative expressions of the Palestinian community. I was at the festival. Like most academic conferences, it was at times energizing, and at times, like all good conferences, you wanted to reach for tea or coffee to keep your eyes open. The primary goal was celebratory of good works that expressed all the joys and sorrows of a community. And certainly there was a lot of sorrow for a community facing occupation and dispossession for so long. The focus was primarily on the Palestinian community. Yet the intensity of the pushback, even before a word was uttered at the conference, portrayed us as somehow threatening to Jewish students when it was not about them at all. The university mostly caved, distancing itself from the festival, making the organizers spend more money, extra money on security. None of the university communications mentioned what about the festival was anti-Semitic or which speakers they objected to. This merely was a whisper campaign that tainted the festival even before a word was uttered. Even afterwards, when the mainstream media picked up on the festival criticism after the events of October 7th, I have yet to see any reporting on what exactly was said at the conference that was anti-Semitic. I encourage all of you to try and look into this yourself. This kind of tainting without substantiation is meant to have a chilling impact on academics. It has been a long-term Zionist strategy in the US. For several decades now, academic careers have been threatened with ruin at the mere mention of Palestine, to the extent that junior faculty and researchers are advised to stay away from anything related to Palestine. I experienced this myself when I was part of a study tour that went to the West Bank in May 2023. Before the trip, I was hesitant to mention even the P word, at times simply saying that I was going to Israel, as I have written elsewhere. It is this same silencing playbook that Hindu supremacist groups are seeking to adopt and have begun to use very effectively as a model. In 2021, academic units from 40 universities co-sponsored the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference, an academic conference meant to examine the rise of exclusive, violent, supremacist ideology in India. Professor Hansen, I believe, was a part of this conference. Even before a word was uttered at the conference, universities and panelists were inundated with hateful and threatening messages, falsely accusing them of being anti-Hindu when the conference was about the political ideology of supremacy. My own university, which was one of the co-sponsors, received over thousands of messages in a matter of days and had to institute an email filter to block the messages. This model of silencing critics, even before a word is uttered, is again a common tactic that has a chilling effect. This kind of fearful environment is even more heightened in India, where academics working even on tangential issues like poverty or caste discrimination are now hounded and threatened with the law for being anti-Hindu, anti-national, and portraying the Hindu nationalist government in a bad light for merely doing routine academic work and research. This kind of silencing is antithetical to the liberal democratic image that both India and Israel seek to project and profit from. The silencing is also enabled by a media environment globally, certainly here in the US, and particularly in India, that has become monopolized by large corporate groups with barely any spaces for independent voices to challenge and offer critical perspectives. Add to this the loud presence of extremist voices on social media, which is allowing these threads of Zionism and Hindu supremacists to coalesce. Indian social media, which has been referred to as the disinformation capital of the world, has amplified pro-Zionist coverage and dehumanization of Palestinians with the rapid spread of fake images. In the current scenario, this alignment of Indian right-wing groups and the Indian government with the right-wing Israeli government also seems to be extremely short-sighted. Its past principled position on Palestinian rights, combined with a long history of providing a welcoming space for Jewish communities, actually gave India a lot of relevance and global standing on the Palestine and Israel question. But now, with many countries in the global south raising their collective voices against the extremist policies of the Israeli state, Indian isolation from its peers in the global south, like Brazil and South Africa and other places, particularly at the time when US power is diminishing, can only push India into irrelevancy on the global stage. There is also a false impression being created that the loudest of Zionist and Hindu supremacist voices represent all Jewish and Hindu communities. Speaking for myself and for the organization like Hindus for Human Rights, I want to say that they don't represent us and cannot presume to speak for all Hindus. For us, there is no compassion, there is no faith without compassion and empathy. Hinduism is vast and presents many different traditions. Reducing it to a single-minded, exclusionary, and hateful rhetoric is in fact the real threat to Hinduism. Similarly, when I was in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, I saw many Jewish groups and individuals working in solidarity with Palestinians, attempting to protect them against the everyday violence of the occupation. And here in the US, of course, as we are seeing, there are many, many Jewish voices of peace. It is these voices, our voices, that I hope panels like this can continue to amplify. At the same time, I also don't want to minimize the rising threat of anti-Semitism and dangerous rhetoric against racial and religious minority communities, including the Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh South Asian communities in the US and other parts of the Western world. But those threats are rooted in white supremacy. They're not coming from the already marginalized groups like Muslims and Palestinians. In fact, these divisive discourses against minority communities is just a distraction and can only empower and embolden white supremacy. As South Asian minority groups, we should be finding solidarity with other marginalized and minority communities in our collective fight against white supremacy. I take great inspiration from the recent Interfaith Pilgrimage for Peace that Raju spoke about. It was a peace march from Philadelphia to DC, trying to amplify calls for ceasefire. This Interfaith Peace March was organized by Faith for Black Lives, a coalition of African-American faith leaders that usually mobilizes for racial justice in the US. Despite the tremendous challenges facing their own communities, this group of African-American faith leaders have found the compassion and really shown us the path to build a solidarity movement. And I hope we can take inspiration from that. I myself was very grateful to represent HFHR at the beginning in Philadelphia. And I believe the HFHR communication research director, Pranay Soumyajalu, represented us at DC when the march ended. And I think I'll end my talk now because Raju mentioned that you're going to play Pranay's speech. Is that still correct, Raju?
Yes, Ramya, our own Pranay was at the other end of the march in DC, and we have a short clip about his statement, which basically encapsulates HFHR's position.
Namaste, everyone. Namaste. My name is Pranay Soumyajalu. I'm the Director of Research and Advocacy Campaigns at Hindus for Human Rights. We're an organization that was formed in...
Sorry, I have to share it with the Zoom audience.
in 2019 to provide a Hindu voice of resistance to caste, Hindutva, racism, and all forms of bigotry and oppression. We at Hindus for Human Rights have joined this pilgrimage for peace, what we would call in Sanskrit a Shanti Yatra, because our dharma, our sacred duty as Hindus calls us to stand for justice. It calls us to stand with all people suffering under the weight of violence and oppression. And in this moment, in this devastating moment, our Dharma calls us to stand in unyielding solidarity with the people of Gaza. Time and time again, our Hindu scriptures and stories emphasize the sacred importance of satya, of truth. And we're here today because in spite of all the hate and the lies and the propaganda being fed to us by our political leaders and our media institutions, we know the truth about what is happening right now in Gaza. We know that what is unfolding in front of our very eyes is not just a war or a conflict. What we are witnessing is nothing less than a genocide fueled by our tax dollars and carried out with the full-throated support of this shameful administration against a people who have suffered for decades under an inhuman regime of apartheid, siege, and occupation. And we're here today in the spirit of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, to say loud and clear what we know in our hearts to be true, that the only way to bring about a real and lasting peace is an immediate ceasefire, the release of the hostages, and an end to this brutal occupation. We dream of a future where all the people of Palestine, Jews, Muslims, Christians, and everyone else, is free to live together in peace, dignity, and liberation from the river to the sea. And just as we at Hindus for Human Rights stand against the violent, exclusionary, ethno-nationalist Hindutva ideology that is threatening democracy and human rights in India, so too do we stand with our Jewish siblings against the violent, exclusionary, ethno-nationalist Zionist ideology fueling this genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Our struggles are interconnected, so too our futures, and so too is our shared liberation. And we recognize that we are part of a long and rich tradition of radical Desi solidarity with the Palestinian people. I'd like to conclude my remarks today with the words of someone who exemplified that tradition far better than I could ever hope to do. The Urdu poet, Faiz Ahmed Faiz, who in his work championed the downtrodden and dreamt of a liberated future for communities across South Asia and the rest of the world. And this poem, which is translated into English as "For the Palestinian Martyrs Who Never Came Home," was written in 1980 while Faiz was living in exile in Beirut. And here's the poem. Wherever I have gone, earth of my homeland, the scars of your humiliation burning in my heart, the candles of your dignity, a light in my heart, your love and the pain of your memory came with me. The scent of your orange blossoms came with me. The company of every unseen comrade stayed with me. So many hands clasped to mine stayed with me. In the unfriendly streets of a foreign land I wandered. In unknown cities without names or signs I wandered. I opened my banner of blood even there. And the flag of my homeland Palestine waves there. Your enemies laid waste to one Palestine. In each of my wounds lives another Palestine. Thank you all so much. And in the spirit of this beautiful interfaith Shanti Yatra, I'll leave you today with a prayer. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all the people in the world be happy and free. Thank you. Free Palestine.
That's the youngest member of Hindus for Human Rights.
The future looks bright.
Thanks, Brian. Well, that brings us to what time is it? Oh, I have said we really should, considering all of the value of all of your time, to have a hard stop for the discussion because we have not had chance to answer any questions you may all have. Shall we say, let's see how many questions are there, and then with your help, we can try and answer them. For those in the room, you have the cards, and if you we haven't done that, right, otherwise,
Can't we just?
otherwise, okay. But there is one other request. If there are no questions, may I ask all of you to stay back just a couple of minutes and come over to this side so we can take a group photograph, if you don't mind.
Can't we
Okay.
have just a little open discussion?
probably
David?
speak up and ask the questions.
Yeah, the consensus in the room is, I think, there are no questions. We've had a very enthusiastic, supportive crowd. There what? Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you. Great panel. I really loved all the discussions. I want to ask for Professor Hansen and the representative from JVP, as we're thinking about how to counter the rise of Hindutva, I'm wondering what the what the victimization narrative is for people who champion Hindutva. I assume that there is one, and that their power really grows from those perceived grievances, but I'm kind of interested to know what that is in, a nation where Hindus objectively, by any objective measure, have immense power over any other group. And to go off of, I think it was Ellen's point of then what that could mean for encountering that, creating a community that counters that trauma in an effective way for some of those narratives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer at least a part of that. So some of you might know that one of the big themes in Hindu nationalism, and it begins very early, already in the 1920s, is demographic anxiety. It had to do with the balance between numbers of Hindus and Muslims in British India. And that's what drives a lot of the early mobilization. There was a book called Hindus, A Dying Race that was written by a scholar in the 1910s. That's been reprinted recently and is selling like hotcakes or across India. So this idea that there's a demographic threat from what is today a minority of about 17 or 15% of the Indian population is a myth that simply doesn't want to die. And one of the big things that drive the current campaigns, for instance, the campaigns against love jihad, this sort of myth that Muslims are constantly trying to seduce young, innocent Hindu girls in order to convert them to Islam and make Islam a majority religion, is receiving an unimaginable amount of credibility and power at the ground level. So that's one thing. The other victimization narrative is, of course, that is in a sense at the heart of the movement itself, that is in some ways an internalization of a colonial stereotype of Muslims as being more manly and warlike and Hindus as being less so, and so on. And this sort of idea of turning it around. So a lot of the extreme violence is also a form of revenge violence, historical revenge violence. If you look at the current Bollywood movies being produced, most of them are extreme kind of revenge violence fantasies of what historical Hindu figures should have done to Muslims 200 years ago or 300 years ago. All of it is factually untrue. There's no basis for it, but it's extremely popular. So that's what fuels a lot of this kind of stuff. Basically it's emasculation, fear of emasculation, historical emasculation, all that stuff. And the desire to be like a white supremacist, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Could I say something?
Yeah.
Just to add to what Tom just said, there's a very strong, calculated, and effective takeover of education and of the discourses of history, and also the media and the suppression of actually true voices of true history. So there's a widely accepted belief that basically Hindus have been oppressed and under the domination of Muslims ever since the Delhi Sultanate.
Yeah.
And that Hindus are finally liberating themselves. And it's, I know people here in the United States, you know, Hindus born in the United States who absolutely believe that and propagate it on Facebook. So that's another big piece of it.
Thank you.
No,
Thank
I'm
you,
just
Linda.
gonna,
Let-
I think
let-
anti-Semitism is a
Oh, sorry.
little different.
Yeah.
And the victimization comes from this idea that anti-Semitism is this eternal virus, okay? That, kind of goes up and down depending on the society, but it's always eternal. It's always there. It's a virus that can't be overcome. And actually, JVP is working in cooperation with an organization called Parseo, has developed a curriculum on anti-Semitism called Anti-Semitism in the Framework of Collective Liberation. Because essentially, anti-Semitism is very different based on the material conditions in each country. But the virus people, the Zionists, take Eastern, take European anti-Semitism and just put it everywhere in the world. And if you look at it, Jews in Arab countries were treated very differently than Jews in Europe. So one of the things, and take the United States, there's this idea that it's true, anti-Semitism is rising in the United States. Why? Because white nationalism is rising in the United States, because white supremacy is rising. But compare Jews in the United States to settler colonialism, to the institutional systemic racism toward Black people and other people of color, toward state violence against Arabs and Muslims as part of the war on terror. So this is what we're working to help the Jewish community understand, is a whole different approach to fighting anti-Semitism, which is not based on this eternal virus that can never be fought, but is based on collective solidarity and liberation and identifying white supremacy and white nationalism as our common enemy. So that's how we're choosing to deal with it in Jewish Voice for Peace. So.
Thank you. Yes, you had it.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to this actually, because I think there's a layer of analysis that's just missing in what I'm hearing about like this broad strokes of Hinduism, when like really defining like casteism and Brahmanism is like what you said about emasculation is absolutely correct, but it's like the Brahmin man and the Brahminical patriarchy that is like really defining that. Please, okay, I don't actually want pictures of myself. And I think like around the victimization part too, like yes, historical, like the Brahmanism and like is a pre-colonial like construct or like system of oppression. And like I think particularly today around like the anti-reservation, discourse is like a big like lens or like victimizing like thing of like, oh, all these seats are like being reserved. And that's actually like not true. So I can send you some good Instagram influencers who talk about this, but like, yeah, just that like I don't know how we can't like talk about Hinduism in the US especially without talking about caste. So I think that like that, and I don't actually know that you can separate Hinduism from casteism. So I think that's an important layer that actually I don't even know that you can one-to-one correlate anti-Semitism with so-called anti-Hinduism, like anti-Hindu sentiment, because like that doesn't exist.
Thank you. Yes. I think we need a microphone.
I'm wondering if you can, if any of the speakers can talk about the role of the United States in the creation of Hindutva, particularly, and also in like the elite diaspora communities who are funding it. Can Hindutva exist in its current form without that? right? Without the funding, without the power, without the support that's coming from the United States. Maybe there's maybe we can think about the United States support for Israel as well in that context. I'm Indian. I was born and raised in the United States. I'm Muslim, and my sense of myself as an Indian has changed. Like I would say, like gradually since 1992. And so I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
Can I say something about that? Yeah, thank you. I don't think any of these projects could exist without the sort of global fundraising operation. And if you track where Modi went, in the first few years he was in power, it looked like he was doing diplomacy, but actually he was raising funds. He went to wherever there were big chunks of wealthy overseas Indians, including here. So that's is at the heart of it. It's been at the heart of it, of the Hindutva operation for a long time. They depend on these sort of overseas contributions while they are shutting down the possibilities of NGOs and other people receiving foreign funds in India. So there's like an exception for them. I think the same is true of Israel. Certainly, maybe not in the 1960s, but certainly as of now. I think it's very hard to imagine the Israeli economy and the Israeli settler project without the massive funding that's coming. This is not U.S. government only. I mean, that goes to hardware and weapons and all these things we know about, but just from large donations. So I think it's entangled completely, but that was not how it always was, right? It's become like that. And certainly in India, if you look at how the Hindu nationalists looked at the world in the 1960s, U.S. was nowhere in the picture. Now it's everywhere. Right? It's the big thing. And the same with Israel. That link with the U.S. has grown tremendously. It has to do with many dimensions to it. But I think, yeah, so it's not the U.S. government only, but it's as much kind of civil society with everyone.
May I add a comment to that? In terms of can the power of Hindutva exist without tacit support by the US government? The answer is no, it cannot exist in its current form without such strong support from the diaspora, Indian Americans, and the government. But the support is not just in terms of funding. It is a defensive wall that has been built around India's or Modi's policies in Washington, D.C. Even the slightest departure from the script that is fed to the Biden government is immediately halted by a whole series of organizations here who are nothing but an extension of the Modi government, in my view. They may be independent legally, but they are direct extensions of the Modi government. Hindu American Foundation, for example, I can't think of a single policy issue that they have differed from the Modi government. And it kind of reminds me quickly an anecdotal thing. In I think late 1992 is when the first major VHP Global Vision 2000 conference happened in DC. And I was shocked to see an arena full of people there. And during those 3 days, many decisions were made by the VHP, by the RSS, including the importance of following in the path of Zionism. Goes back that far. They had meetings, they had plans. So that foundation has been there very strongly. But the fact that they have their government in India has simply, they're able to exploit all of that in every which way, from a funding perspective, defending the regime and so forth, which is why we as Hindus for Human Rights, besides appealing to moderate progressive Hindus, one of our major tasks is to expose the duplicity of some of these organizations who claim to be charitable organizations in the US, spreading Hindu culture, going and visiting firehouses and police stations, tying Raksha bandhans around people. The idea, the whole image we've created, why are you attacking such a fantastic organization that do social service? But very little is known about what they do with the funds raised and so forth. So anyway, long story short, I just wanted to emphasize that is one of our major trusts as Hindus for Human Rights. Research, report, advocate in the DC, try to get other organizations who are unknowingly working with some of these organizations to educate them on what they are really doing, so they can reconsider whether that such partnerships are appropriate or not, including among interfaith groups, which they have dominated in the past, and now Hindus for Human Rights is actively part of some of the interfaith groups. And I think we are more than welcome there to give an alternative voice of Hinduism. Any other?
So, yeah, I have a question to the Palestinian activists who are here. Okay, so can you hear me now? So I have just a question because I come from India. I don't know much about the resistance movement. So is there any space for the Gandhian way of a movement in the Palestinian resistance movement? Is there any chance that the Palestinian people can follow the Gandhian way to fight against injustice? And the second question to Professor Thomas is that you have mentioned that Savarkar has coined the term Hindutva, but if I'm not wrong, I think the term has been coined by Chandra Basu.
Yeah.
Yes, and another question.
He made it famous.
Yes, he made it famous. And another thing I have a question for you, like since you have studied much more Hindutva. So the thing is that so Savarkar was an atheist. So how come an atheist man has built up such a huge religious movement, which is beyond
not religious.
Pardon?
It's not religious.
Yeah, he's not religious, but
No, the movement is not.
yeah, but then he's possibly make fool out of it, like people, right? So how do you like convey to the people like that the man who is not religious is fooling people who are religious? So that's beyond of my compliments. Thank you so much.
Yeah, maybe I can speak to that a little bit, about nonviolence in general. I don't know about the Gandhian way in particular. I'm not an expert in that field, but I understand that Gandhi led a primarily nonviolent movement. And I think, so Palestinian struggle, I think, over the decades has taken different forms and shapes, and struggle against colonialism and colonial violence by everybody, by all people who were colonialized from India to Algeria, took different shapes and forms, including violence. So I think it's a misconception that Palestinians only resist violently or resisted violently. In 1936, there was like the longest labor strike in history by Palestinians against Zionist colonialism and against British mandates. The first Intifada was vastly a nonviolent demonstration in the street, and it was a global and powerful movement. Just recently, people in Gaza took on these called them freedom marches or return marches, where they marched towards the fence for almost 2 years, right? Of course, every time they were faced with, I mean, what happened to the marchers? They were actually hunted by snipers. Palestinians in the first Intifada was also like brutally, violently suppressed and killed. So, of course, Palestinians, as all people who struggle against violent settler colonialism, resisted by all means possible, strikes, nonviolent marches, and violence. And I think, and I follow the tradition of many people who struggle against settler colonialism, Nared Fanon and others. It's impossible for, oppressors and settler colonialists always say, the natives only understand violence. It's actually quite the other way around. The violence that the oppressor understands, that the language is violence. Ultimately, violence is necessary, it turns out, and I think it's used. And also nonviolent resistance has been used and will continue to be used. In other words, by all means necessary.
Thank you. No, just want to add one thing to that. Sometimes we need to clarify what is violence. What is exactly like I'm not asking you, just when we think about that, if you think about India, for example, and during the struggle, this is one way. But with the history, it's not possible to ask the people, the oppressed people, to choose which style they should struggle. It's up to them. This is the choice they can choose, with even anywhere. I am not speaking about international law or United Nations, all this blah, 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 blah. But for the people they are living under oppression, it's up to them which kind of, we cannot judge them like comparing, the history there. For example, Mandela, he was in the terrorist list even after he was visited the White House. He was still in the terrorist list. The other thing for the Palestinian, just I will clarify while he answered, for Palestinians living inside Palestine, even inside in the diaspora, but mostly inside Palestine, every day when you when you pass a checkpoint, you don't react, it's still non-violent. Every time you go to get water to drink and you don't have water, but other person swim in the swimming pools and washing their cars and you don't react, it's a non-violence to answer. Every Palestinian, I believe, they access what's called non-violence. But when the victim, this is what I see sometimes in the academic, with all the respect, they don't mean to be very bad or rude. But for the academic, you have now a huge transformation, non-violence, and all these kind of styles. For me, I look at it, this is the way how the colonial system tried to reduce the reaction of the victims and direct the struggle of the victims. I will shut up here. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me end here. Thank you all for participating in the lovely discussion. There's obviously a lot more that we can talk about. Let's pray for peace in Gaza. Let's pray for better minds that will apply themselves to solving the problem. Let's work together. And once again, my request, if you can all move up here, we can take a quick photograph. If you don't want to be in it, doesn't matter. I totally understand. I don't want to be.
Raju, should I end the meeting?
Yeah.